Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Need a powerful and entertaining way to ignite your next conference, retreat, or team building session? My keynotes don't include magic, but they do have the power to help your attendees take a leap forward by putting emotional intelligence into their employee engagement, and customer-centric leadership practices. So bring the infotainment creativity of the Fast Leader Show to your next event, and I'll help your attendees get over the hump now. Go to beyondmorale.com/speaking to learn more. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited to have the guest that we have on the show today because he has a system that I think can help us all. Paul Larson flew into his Northern California home in the early 60s, being raised in the Bay Area communities of Hayward and Livermore. The youngest of four spirited children, Paul is the son of an airline pilot and a very creative homemaker and talented artist. Instilled at an early age to the value of education and learning, Paul consistently found himself in teacher roles, no matter if his job was flipping hamburgers, selling shoes, or bagging groceries. It seemed that friends, family, colleagues, and strangers always sought him out for advice, counsel, and coaching. It was this intuitive talent that led Paul to his various successful corporate roles, such as leading human resources and learning and development for teams at Charles Schwab, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and Adobe Technologies. However, it was not until later in life, in 2009, that Paul truly found his voice. On a warm day in June, Paul was sitting on a church pew with the sun streaming through the stained glass windows. He was listening intently to people as they each extolled virtues of a man that had recently passed away. That man was Paul's father, Alf N. Larson Jr. Each person got up to the microphone and talked about the positive impact that Alf had on their life. As a colleague, friend, family member, and Army Air Corps fighter pilot of World War II, it was during this love fest that Paul had one of his biggest epiphanies of his life. What will people be saying at my memorial service? What will my legacy be? What impact do I have on other people, my communities, the world? What impact do I want to have? Calling this his final mentoring moment from his father, Paul set out to find his true voice and realized the potential he knew was still hiding within him. Saying goodbye to the traditional corporate roles, Paul created his core message around find your voice as a leader by discovering your values, creating your outcomes, exercising your influence, demonstrating your courage and community, and communicating your overall expression for positive impact. This is what his parents had always modeled. He was putting it into practice to share with the world. Paul now works at his true calling as an established executive coach, helping leaders find their voice, and is the author of the book, Find Your Voice as a Leader. When not traveling the globe, he lives in San Francisco, California with his partner of 25 years, Steve, and relishes his relationships with his 7 nieces and nephews and his 25 great nieces and nephews, while always living by his motto, life is too short not to find your voice, so what are you waiting for? Paul Larson, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am ready, Jim, to help us all get over the hump.
I appreciate that. Okay, so I've given our listeners a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we get to know you even better?
Yeah, my current passion is really, Jim, is working with leaders in any capacity in life. You don't have to have the title to be a leader. So get out and lead. Find your true calling. Find your voice. Take a stand. As you just so eloquently put in terms of my story, life is too short for us not to find our voice. So get out and lead. And that's really what I work on. My experience has been in the corporate world. So I really work in leaders because a lot of times corporations do a job of trying to stifle creativity, stifle communication. And they do that because of the bureaucracy, because of the momentum they need to have around their business. But what it does is creates leaders who are all the same, who norm all the same. And what I want to do is I work with leaders individually so they create their unique voice, that unique value, that unique set of DNA to make them stand up and have an impact for the people in their community.
You know, I appreciate your energy and your passion for this because it's definitely contagious. And for me, I want to get on the edge of my seat. So now we had the opportunity to talk earlier, and, you know, there's several things that actually stood out to me, and there's a couple that I'd like to focus on. And you had said that the reality is for all of us is that our legacy is currently being authored. And if we stop and think about the author of our own legacy, who is it really?
You know, Jim, that's great. Conventional wisdom would say that the author of our legacy is someone else. If you look at folks and you look at leaders and you look at people in the community, many times the legacy is being written by people other than the individual. When I work with leaders, one of the very first questions I ask, I'll always ask, what's your legacy? What's the legacy you're leaving? And the look I get is beyond that chicken and beef look, or what are you going to have for a drink? It's like, whoa, like I've never thought of that. I think my legacy is this. And what I want people to do is really have an anchor, author who they are as a leader, author who you are as a community, and not let it be authored by other people. Certainly in today's world, we live in a society where we are bombarded with all the media. We are bombarded with likes and tweets and postings and so forth that can certainly shape people's viewpoints. But you have an absolute accountability to establish who you are, especially in a leadership role, and especially the impact you want to leave. You know, there's always the old adage. I remember, when growing up, there's always that old adage of, I remember my grandmother and my aunts who were of course older at that time, reading the obituaries. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you reading obituaries? It just sounds depressing. It just sounds like, gosh, you just want to see who has passed or who dies. But if you really think about it, the obituary is an archived record of the legacy of that person. And many times that obituary that is printed online or in the paper is not even written by the individual who it's about. So I use that as a lesson, because it's not about writing our obituary, but it is crafting a legacy. Because no matter when you're gone, and when I say gone, I don't necessarily mean gone from the world. I mean gone from the meeting, gone from the room, gone from that organization, that legacy stays there. So you better have an accountability. You better take the steps to establish the legacy that you want and author it yourself.
You know, so many things were running through my head as you shared that, and thank you for doing it, is that, you know, even last night when I'm driving home with my 11-year-old son from a baseball practice, and one of the things that my wife and I always try to focus on with our children is their effort. And he was not putting together a very good effort last night. And so I asked him the question. I said, what do you want people to think about you when they hear your name?
Beautiful.
And he thought for a moment, he goes, good. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by good? You want them to think good. Good about what? And so I tried to get him to talk and think about that. And then I tied it back around to his behavior. I said, so do you think people think good about you when you sat down in right field and didn't want to participate? Mm-hmm. Do you think people felt good about you when everybody else was running and you were dragging your feet? So when you talk about having people think good about you, what do you have to do in order for that to happen?
Yeah, Jim, that is a brilliant example on so many levels. Number one, you touched on the questions that we should always think. You touched on the definitions that go beyond just good, and just go beyond to say, well, I think I want to be thought of as good or okay or a nice person. What does that mean? But more brilliantly, in what you just described, is that it was 11-year-old son that you were talking to and talking with. And if you really think about this, if we took the responsibility in today's community and we had discussions like that with our children, with our students, with people who are up and coming in life and up and coming through our academic process, think about the difference that will have long term. I have no doubt, not even knowing your son and knowing the relationship, but I have no doubt that will stick with your son. And that will carry forward as he progresses to 12, 13, 14, and into later in life. And he will remember that and be very deliberate with his actions and that legacy. Well, but the brilliancy of that, I just applaud you on that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I can tell you it's come from a lot of hard knocks, and that's why there's follicle loss on the top of my head. And I know that I'll probably be having to have this conversation repeatedly for many years, and probably until maybe I'll get my, and I don't want to say satisfaction, because I don't know, but when he's sitting in the pew and the light is shining in his eyes, hopefully he'll have his moment. Now, one of the things also too, I think is really important, because you and I had chatted about this a little bit, is that I want him to be able to know and understand his values as he progresses throughout his life. And, we talked about that finding your voice, and that first step, to me, I think is one of the most critical ones, is having people to identify their own values. I was conducting a workshop with about 50 or 60 leaders where we were doing some values identification. And I asked folks, as we were like 3/4 of the way through the workshop, I said, how many of you have ever done anything like this before? And maybe 3 people raised their hands. And the only reason they had done that is because those folks were part of a corporate, environment that actually went through this discovery process.
Right.
But when you talk about values, most people, I don't think, really know what they are.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Jim. And if you really think about it, without really knowing who we are, without knowing what our values are, how do we know where we're going? How do we know the decisions that we're making are going to be the best decisions, whether it's for today, next week, next year, for ourselves, our family, our friends, whatever that might be? And really understanding our values, our core DNA, that is everything around how we judge. It's everything around the actions we take. It's everything around the purpose that we have. It's how we behave. So to your point around the folks that are really looking at sort of like, man, what do I value? One of the first things I ask when I enter into a coaching partnership, certainly when I ask leaders, is what do you value? And how do you know you value that? And the reason I ask the second piece, which is the kind of the ROI, or the return on investment of your values, because many times when I ask leaders, to your point around the corporate world, I'll ask leaders like, what do you value? I'll all of a sudden start to get a list of values that are tacked up on their wall because they're the corporate values or the corporate mission, which are great. And those are wonderful. And we all have had experience with those, and companies need that as a compass. But more importantly, I want that leader to understand what is their compass. So I'll get that superficial response first, which is, well, I value teamwork. I value open door. I have an open door policy. I value open communication. It's like, really? Then why is your door closed every time I come in here? Why is it when I ask your team members, they say you're completely unapproachable and you're never available? So the behavior does not match what you're actually saying. And a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times when I dig deeper through discussions, through assessments, whatever that might be, truly the values come out. It's like, no, I don't really value that. I actually value a different type of style, or I have a different motivation. And that's all good. This is not judgment on what's a good value and what's a bad value. But leaders and organizations get to a point where they think they need to value X or they need to value Y, because if I really value A or B, that's not good for this organization, or that's not good for what people will think of me or like me for. And thus we get wrapped up in this. So people just kind of, to your point, they don't do the work on values, and then they wonder why they're like a ship that's just kind of drifting, kind of rudderless. And then they wake up 7 years later. It's like, how did I get in this company where I don't like what I'm doing? How is my life like this? It's because you didn't start with that core set of beliefs and really identifying what those are, and then living those out with your behavior, your impact. And again, it goes back to creating that legacy.
Oftentimes we hear a lot of differences about generations, multiple generations in the workforce. And we talk about, boomers, Xers, millennials. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. However, when you start thinking about values, a lot of times values seem to be something that's inherited and passed throughout, family generations and things along those lines. But when you start talking about values and working with different folks, what do you see as some of the interesting dynamics of it?
I work with millennials. I work with the Gen Ys. I work with the Gen Xs. I work with the baby boomers. And to be honest with you, sometimes I'm so confused, I don't even know what's what, except what you said was key. Many times when I'm working with, let's take the millennials who have come up, and they certainly have a brand, right? We hear that all the time. That's the workforce of the hour right now. And how do you manage millennials, and how do you engage millennials and all this stuff? But they actually come up, and I think it's because of just the communities they've been raised in, the parents and or the mentors or the guides they've had. they come up with a true set of who they are and what their values are. And many times, those values that the millennials are espousing, of course, not everybody, but many of them in leadership positions, are contrary to the values of, let's say, the Gen Xers or the baby boomers or the older generations, of which, by the way, I'm part of. So I own that. And hence we get all this kind of contradiction, or we get these gaps that come in around, well, the millennials are XYZ because they don't share X, Y, A, B, C over here. In other words, the values are in contradiction when in fact, the values are just different, and the values are identified early on. The Gen Xers have certainly a value of working hard and really being committed and persevering, and the millennials have a value of wow, really looking at where can I do the best work? What does that look like? And if I'm not doing engagement here, I'm not making an impact, I'm going to go somewhere else. So then they get the reputation of they're just flighty. They cross over, they go from company to company. When in fact, when they're at those organizations, they are working as hard, at least my experience has been, they are working as hard as the Gen Xers. And this isn't about one generation is better than the other, but there are certainly brands and there are certainly value judgments that are made because of the way that they live and the way that behavior then is espoused by the values. And I think if you really think about today's world, right, and you think about where we are as a society, where we are as a community, our global community, those of us in the United States, values are at the forefront of all conversations. But yet, even though they're at the forefront of all conversations and they drive conversations, do we really know what our values are?
Is there a quote or two that kind of stands out for you that you can share?
Yeah, there's one I have, Jim. I use it, and it's not as probably eloquent as a lot of other quotes that we see now all over social media that come out. But it's and especially in today's climate in our society, the political climate as well. And it's about, hey, leader, it's not about likability, it's about credibility. Find your voice, get out and lead, or get out of the way. There are enough leaders in today's world that will hide in the shadows or hide on the coattails of someone else. It's like, then get out of my way. I've got better things to do. I want to get out and lead and make a difference. I would much rather have in my career, and I think about all the leaders I've interacted with, both from a team member, both as a peer, both and certainly now as a coach, I would much rather have a leader in front of me who I may not agree with, but I certainly understand where they're coming from. I certainly understand their opinions. I certainly understand their decisions they make, their values. I may not agree with them at all, and I may even judge that. That's okay. I know where they're coming from, versus somebody who sits there and shakes their head and does the bobblehead leadership, and you never know what they're thinking. You never know what their thoughts are. You never know what their decisions will be until they zing you. And they zing you in a way that it would be a blindside. And that we have so much of that in today's world, where people are for whatever reason, resistant, hesitant, afraid, intimidated to actually speak up and really take a stand, especially as a leader.
That's true. And I don't know, what it's going to take in order to get over the fear. I mean, really, then just individuals doing it. And so, right. And it goes back to, you had mentioned about, the epiphany that you had sitting in the church pew and to get to that point, to get past that point, to do all of these things, to stand up, to find your voice. I mean, you have to get over a lot of humps to do that. That's for sure. Is there a time that you've had to get over the hump, but it helped you find your voice that you can share? In
my very, very first job as a manager, I was promoted into a manager role. And I got to tell you, when it was a software company, it was decades ago. And when I got that promotion, I wasn't even up for the promotion. I was just kind of tapped on the shoulder. So man, my ego just went, my head must have been like big head. It would just expanded. And I'm sitting there like, wow, I'm going to be a manager and I'm going to have 15 people. Nowadays, I would probably run screaming with 15 people, right? Without any kind of leadership strength or bench strength or succession management. But at that time, it was like 15 people. And of course, where did I go? Right to power, right to ego, right to all those things that you're not supposed to go, but will make your head implode. But where I went also was that popularity piece. So this was really key for me, Jim. This was such an aha moment. It was a software company. We were in a big business park. I got a nice big office. I was like, wow, look at the size of this table. Look how many chairs I get. Look at all this stuff. All of a sudden, though, I was really alone. I became very alone overnight because all of a sudden, with the ego, the power trip, the whole bit, I was not a very popular or influential manager. I became the manager of my peers and who I thought were my friends. And overnight, I became absolutely a pariah. I became that pariah leader, that pariah manager. Like, what happened to Paul? And I was looking at myself like, I haven't changed. I haven't done anything different. I'm now the manager. I can control this. I can control your work. So I remember it was a Thursday night, and to this day, it was a Thursday night. It was 6:30. I was in the office. The lights were kind of dimmed, and it was raining outside. And the whole group of folks that I had managed, again, these 15 folks that I'd been pretty close to, had all gone out for dinner for a birthday party, and I was not invited. And I sat there feeling sorry for myself in my little office as it got progressively darker outside. And I sat there just like the victim. And I remember just sitting there thinking, oh, woe is me. Just woe is me. And I'm like, what happened? And then in like an instant, I'm sitting there like, what's going on? Who is this? Who is this person sitting in this chair thinking this? Because I had always been sort of like somebody that was always looking for kind of the next and kind of growing and kind of like, looking to kind of like expand sort of my skills and comfort zone and everything that my parents had done such a wonderful job with me. And I'm sitting there like feeling so sorry for myself. And I'm like, this is not who I am. Now, at that time, to be honest with you, I didn't have the I would love to say I had the strategy and the forethought to like, oh, I want to build my legacy. I had no clue. I just wanted to get through Friday, which was the next day. But I said, I've got to change. I have to change something. I've got to change my mindset. If I want to be successful in this role, I've got to change my thinking. And I went right outside, and my boss's door was open. She was still in. And I said, hey, can I grab a minute with you? And I said, I don't know what to do. And right there in that moment, I kind of showed a vulnerability, if you will. And I kind of opened myself up, which up to that point did not happen. And she says, yeah, she goes, I was kind of wondering how long it was going to take for you to come in here. And I said, I go, what do you mean? She goes, you're struggling. She goes, she goes, they don't want anything to do with you. She goes, they don't, you are creating, you're just digging a hole. And she goes, I was just kind of wondering at some point, she goes, I knew something would hit you. And I was wondering if today would be that day, given what was going on, right? Because she knew as well, we weren't that huge of a company. And sure enough, she goes, Paul, as soon as you became manager, you became the topic of dinner conversation at their tables every night. You became the manager. You took on a different role than Paul the friend, Paul the fun guy, Paul the humorist, Paul their nice colleague. You became the manager, and that builds something very, very different. Now, this is before again, this is early 90s. It was way before we talk about brand as a leader and all those things. But that was such a moment for me, Jim, in terms of like, what do I do? And she goes, you can figure it out. She goes, I want you to go back and figure. She goes, I'm not going to tell you. So she was a great coach because it was an introduction. It was like, you figure some stuff out. She goes, you've got it in you. She goes, I've seen it. That's why you're in the role you're in. She goes, and you have to kind of go through this to kind of come out on the other side. Otherwise, I'm just telling you, and you're not going to learn anything. And of course, it was a struggle. It took some time. And then I had to really kind of be very purposeful with what I wanted out of my role as a manager and the impact I wanted to have with these folks. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, I'm not going to say things changed overnight. I'm not going to say, oh, I just became this. I still had the triggers in my mind, as we do as folks. As Marshall Goldsmith loves to say, what are your triggers? What triggers you? And at that time, I had a lot of triggers. They were going off all the time. But I took the time. I was very methodical. I built the relationships with these new folks. I built new relationships with these colleagues I had one by one. And they were new relationships because I was in a new role. And that was such an epiphany for me to like say, wow, this is so different. And I'm not going to say that it was something I necessarily just was like engendered with or was happy about, because it really fostered a lot of hard work. But that became the core and foundation of who I am today.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. The advice that she gave, while that is the correct coach response, it's still painful because you're looking for answers.
Oh, you have no idea. I didn't walk out of there kind of kicking up, and walking lighter. I walked out of there like, wow, now what? But it was that food for thought. And it was just that little spark of awareness that we all look for, right? And sometimes we get in so many aspects in our life, like maybe your 11-year-old son got when you ask what's good, define good. It's that little spark of awareness that came up that I then drilled deeper on. And you're absolutely right. I was sitting there like, why are you not giving me a checklist of what I should be doing? Why are you not doing that right now? And what it also then taught for me was, oh, that's how I want to be as a manager. So I don't want to necessarily always direct people. There's, situational, as we all know, there's different situational leadership scenarios, but that's what I wanted to kind of subscribe to be at some point. So yeah, it was a great, very visceral reaction.
So I know you got a lot of things going on, and the release of the book. But what are some of your goals?
So one of my goals is it's always been. I think I've always been somebody who has really prided himself on being a multitasker. The more I can multitask, the more successful I am. So all the roles I had in the corporate world. Oh my God. Oh, I can do this. I can be a generalist. I can be a specialist. I can be a generalist and a specialist in the same minute. I can do everything. And I'll do it really, really good. And so I really worked hard, Jim, on multitasking. And you look at today's world now, I mean, we live in a multitasking environment. We have so many ways to multitask. So I have now flipped that. I have become so much more deliberate with my actions, with my thoughts, with my purpose, and with my message. That even when I had the epiphany and my mentoring moment with my dad about 7 years ago, I still approached it from my multitasking environment. I came out like, okay, I'm going to do coaching. I'm going to do this. I'm going to touch everybody. It's like, I have now funneled it down. I take deep breaths. I create a mindset in myself where it's like, I want to be much more deliberate with everything that I do so that I have that maximum impact that I want, that I desire. Because for me, the multitasking is not a success ratio anymore. It really is being very deliberate with my message. Hence, the first outcome of that, in which I'm celebrating, and I so appreciate this ability to engage with you, is the book. It really forced me to just say, I have a message, I have a craft, I have something I want to share. May not agree with everybody. People may not like it. That's okay. I have something I want to share. That was my first step in being very deliberate and committed. So that's actually what I'm working on.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, Fast Leader Legion, now it's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Paul, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Paul Larson, are you ready to hoe down?
Absolutely. I am ready to hoe down.
All right. So what do you think is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Jumping to conclusions too fast.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Hire smart people and then get out of their way.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
Stepping out of my comfort zone on a continual basis.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
An egg timer.
What would be one book, and it could be from any genre, that you'd recommend to our Legion?
Absolutely. Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Okay, Fast Leader listeners, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Paul Larson. Okay, Paul, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you. But you can't take everything back. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Absolutely. I can't even remember 25. But if I went back to 25, Jim, it would be that ability to be self-aware. The ability to be self-aware, because that starts everything. That ability to have that self-awareness establishes who you are, establishes that ability then to self-monitor and self-regulate, establishes the ability to deal with any type of environment. So that one skill, that one attribute to be able to be self-aware would be absolutely, especially taking that back to my age of 25, I would take that in a heartbeat.
Paul, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Absolutely, Jim. I've got a website at www.paul, N as in Neil, Larson, LARSEN.com.
Paul Larson, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.